The Great Hall of the Citadel of Unity was the largest structure ever built in the known galaxy. Its walls rose so high that clouds formed beneath the ceiling, and its floor could hold the populations of entire planets. On this day in the year 2847, representatives from 17 alien species had gathered to witness something that had never happened before. They had come to judge an entire species and decide its fate. Admiral Jack stood at the center of the chamber. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes that had seen countless battles. His dress uniform was decorated with medals from wars fought across a dozen star systems. Beside him stood Doctor, the chief diplomat of Earth. She was younger than the admiral, with dark hair pulled back from her face and an expression that revealed nothing of the fear she felt inside. Around them, the alien delegates watched from their elevated platforms. They floated in their water-filled spheres, their tentacles moving slowly as they observed. They stood rigid on their 6 legs, their compound eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 holographic displays. They huddled together in their collective mass, communicating through chemical signals that humans could not detect. Each species had sent its most important leaders to witness this moment. High Arbiter presided over the assembly from his throne of living crystal. He was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, and his body pulsed with cold blue light as he prepared to speak. The translator devices carried his words to every corner of the vast chamber. "The human species has been judged," announced. His voice echoed through the hall like the tolling of a funeral bell. "For 300 years we have watched your kind spread across the stars. We have seen your wars, your conquests, and your endless hunger for more. You consume resources without thought for tomorrow. You fight among yourselves and drag others into your conflicts. You are a disease that threatens the health of all civilized space." Stepped forward to speak, but a gesture from silenced her. "The Council has reached its verdict," the High Arbiter continued. "The human species is hereby banished from all civilized space. You will be relocated to the abyss, beyond the galactic rim. You will never return. Any human vessel found within our borders after the grace period will be destroyed without warning." A murmur spread through the assembly. The delegates exchanged glances of surprise and satisfaction. They had expected some punishment for humanity, but banishment to the abyss was essentially a death sentence. No species had ever survived in that cursed region of space. It was a place of deadly radiation, gravitational anomalies, and cosmic horrors that understanding found her voice despite the tightness in her throat. "You are condemning 8 billion people to death. Men, women, and children who have done nothing wrong. Is this the justice of the Galactic Council?" His form pulsed with what might have been irritation. "We are giving your species a chance. That is more than many here believe you deserve. The abyss is unknown territory. Perhaps you will find a way to survive there. Perhaps not. Either way, you will no longer be our concern." The human delegation stood in silence as the weight of the verdict settled upon them. Around the chamber, alien delegates began to disperse, their business concluded. They did not look at the humans as they left. To them, humanity was already dead. Admiral placed a hand on shoulder. His touch was gentle but firm, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the now emptying hall. "We accept the terms." Several delegates stopped and turned to stare. They had expected protests, threats, or desperate pleas for mercy. They had not expected acceptance. Continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Give us 5 years to build our Exodus fleet. We will leave your civilized space and never return. We ask only that you do not interfere with our preparations." Studied the human admiral for a long moment. "You agree to these terms willingly?" "I do." "Then it is done. You have 5 standard years. When that time has passed, any human remaining in council space will be executed." The council chamber fell silent as the last of the delegates departed. Only the humans remained, standing beneath the impossibly high ceiling with the fate of their entire species resting on their shoulders. turned to with fire in her eyes. "Why did you accept? We should have fought. We should have demanded better terms." The admiral shook his head slowly. "Fighting would have given them an excuse to destroy us now. This way we have time, time to prepare, time to build, time to become something they never expected." Within a week of the verdict, humanity mobilized as it never had before. Every shipyard in human space began working around the clock. Commander Sam Fletcher took charge of the orbital construction platforms above Earth, directing the building of vessels that could carry millions of people into the unknown. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Vance coordinated the logistics of the greatest migration in human history, organizing food supplies, medical equipment, and everything else that billions of people would need to survive. Engineer Ben Carter led the team designing the ships themselves. He worked without sleep for days at a time, creating vessels that could withstand the radiation and gravitational chaos of the abyss. He reinforced hulls, redesigned engines, and invented new shielding technology that had never existed before. When his colleagues told him that his designs were impossible, he simply smiled and kept working. Across Earth and the human colonies, families packed their belongings and said goodbye to homes that had been theirs for generations. They loaded onto transport ships and made their way to the gathering points where the Exodus fleet was assembling. Children pressed their faces against windows to watch the stars go by, not understanding that they would never see those particular stars again. The 5 years passed more quickly than anyone expected. When the day of departure finally arrived, a fleet of 10,000 ships hung in orbit above Earth. They were filled with 8 billion human souls, everything that remained of a species that had once dreamed of ruling the galaxy. Admiral stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity and gave the order to depart. One by one, the ships of the Exodus fleet engaged their engines and turned toward the darkness beyond the galactic rim. Joined at the viewport as Earth shrank behind them, she watched until her was nothing more than a tiny blue dot among millions of stars. "They think they have killed us," she said quietly. Allowed himself a small smile. "They have no idea what they have done. The Council saw our aggression as a weakness to be punished. They do not understand that it is our greatest strength. We have survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that should have destroyed us. We have always found a way to endure." The fleet crossed the boundary into the abyss, leaving civilized space behind forever. Ahead of them lay only darkness, danger, and the unknown. But humanity had never been afraid of the dark. The first year in the abyss was a nightmare that tested every limit of human endurance. The radiation storms came without warning, sweeping across the fleet like the wrath of an angry god. Ships that had taken years to build were torn apart in seconds. Thousands of people died in their sleep as invisible waves of energy passed through their hulls. Captain Shaw commanded the scout vessel Endeavour, and he spent every waking hour searching for safe passage through the chaos. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Amy, had grown up on a mining colony near the galactic rim, and she had an instinct for reading the strange patterns of the abyss that no instrument could match. Together, they mapped routes through the radiation belts and marked the gravitational anomalies that could crush a ship like a tin can. On the flagship Unity, Admiral received grim reports every day. 40 ships lost to a storm near the fleet's left flank. 20 more destroyed when they strayed too close to a spatial rift. Disease spreading through the lower decks of a dozen vessels because the water recyclers had failed. Food supplies running lower than expected because some of the storage ships had been damaged during the crossing. Doctor walked the corridors of the refugee ships, trying to bring comfort to people who had lost everything. She held the hands of the dying and spoke words of hope to children who cried for homes they would never see again. At night, she returned to her small cabin and wept alone in the darkness, wondering if she had led her people to their doom. But humanity did not surrender to despair. In the second year, Dr. Cole made a discovery that would change everything. He was who had spent his career studying alien life forms, and he became fascinated by the strange organisms that drifted through the void of the abyss. They were not like any life he had ever encountered. They fed on radiation and grew in the vacuum of space, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Cole spent months studying these creatures in his cramped laboratory aboard the science vessel Discovery. His assistant, Price, helped him develop techniques for capturing and cultivating the organisms. She was a practical woman who had grown up on a farm back on Earth, and she approached alien biology with the same patient determination she had once applied to growing crops. Together, they discovered that the abyss organisms could be processed into a nutritious substance that humans could digest. It did not taste good, but it would keep people alive. Within 6 months, every ship in the fleet had begun cultivating the organisms in special tanks. The food crisis was over. The third year brought new hope when Captain Shaw transmitted an urgent message to the fleet command. His voice crackled with excitement as it came through the communication systems. "We found something, a stable planetary system with 3 worlds that can support human life. I repeat, we have found habitable planets." Admiral ordered the fleet to change course immediately. It took 4 months for all 10,000 ships to reach the system that Shaw had discovered. When they arrived, they found something beyond their wildest dreams. The 3 planets were rich with resources that did not exist anywhere in civilized space. Strange minerals glowed with inner light. Energy sources hummed beneath the surface of the ground. Materials that the laws of physics as humans understood them lay scattered across the landscape like gifts waiting to be claimed. Doctor led the first landing party down to the surface of the largest planet. She stepped out of the shuttle onto soil that no human had ever touched and looked up at a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Tears streamed down her face as she planted a flag in the ground. "We will call this world Haven," she announced to the colonists who had gathered around her. "The Galactic Council thought they were sending us to our graves. Instead, they have given us a kingdom." The colonization happened faster than anyone had thought possible. Within a year, the first permanent settlements had been established on all 3 worlds. Engineer Ben Carter designed new buildings that used the unique materials of the abyss, creating structures that were stronger and more efficient than anything humans had built before. Cities rose from the alien soil, filled with the sounds of children playing and families beginning new lives. The resources of the abyss fueled a technological revolution. Carter developed a new type of engine that actually fed on the gravitational anomalies instead of being destroyed by them. Ships equipped with this technology could travel faster and farther than any vessel in the known galaxy. Doctor, a medical researcher, created treatments from abyss organisms that extended human and cured diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. But it was the military innovations that would prove most important in the years to come. General Chris Holland recognized that the humans of the abyss would need to defend themselves. The Galactic Council had promised death to any human who returned to civilized space, and there was no guarantee that promise would not be extended to the abyss itself someday. Holland established training camps on the second planet, which the colonists had named Forge. He recruited young men and women who had grown up in the harsh conditions of the Exodus and shaped them into soldiers unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. They could survive radiation that would kill ordinary humans. They could fight in environments that would drive others mad. They were tough, resourceful, and absolutely loyal to their people. Commander Laura developed new combat tactics designed for the unique conditions of the abyss. Her strategies took advantage of the chaos that had once been humanity's greatest enemy. She trained pilots to use the gravitational anomalies as weapons, slingshotting their ships through space at speeds that should have been impossible. 10 years after the banishment, the human population had grown to 3 billion across the 3 colony worlds. The Exodus fleet had been transformed into a proper navy, equipped with ships that made the vessels of the Galactic Council look like antiques. The children who had been born during the crossing were now young adults who had never known any home but the abyss. Admiral, growing old but still strong, addressed his people on the anniversary of their arrival at Haven. "We came here as refugees," he said, "cast out by those who feared us and expected us to die. But we did not die. We adapted, we grew, we became something new." He paused and looked out at the crowd of humans who had gathered to hear him speak. Their faces were hard and determined, shaped by years of struggle against an environment that should have destroyed them. "The galaxy forgot about us," continued. "They think we are dead or dying in the darkness beyond their borders. Let them think that. Let them believe they are safe from the species they banished. Because one day, when the time is right, we will show them what humanity has become." The crowd roared its approval. They were no longer the frightened refugees who had fled civilized space. They were the people of the abyss, forged in the fires of survival. And they were only getting started. 40 years had passed since humanity was banished from civilized space. The original Exodus survivors were now elders with gray hair and weathered faces, telling stories of Earth to who had never seen it. The human population had grown to 15 billion across 12 colony worlds, each one carved out of the hostile environment of the abyss through determination and sacrifice. Admiral commanded the Abyss Fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought Defiance. He was the son of Jack, who had led humanity into exile and had died peacefully at the age of 93. Had inherited his father's steady gaze and his talent for leadership, but he had also developed a ruthlessness that the old admiral had never possessed. The abyss had shaped him into something harder than his father had ever been. The fleet had grown into a force that would have terrified the Galactic Council if they had known it existed. 200 warships patrolled the borders of human space, equipped with weapons and technology that had no equal anywhere in the known galaxy. The soldiers who crewed these vessels were the children and of the Exodus generation, born and raised in conditions that would have killed ordinary humans. But the greatest discovery was yet to come. Captain Grant commanded the exploration vessel Pioneer, tasked with mapping the deepest regions of the abyss. She was a curious woman who had always wanted to know what lay beyond the next horizon. Her crew had volunteered for missions that other captains considered suicide runs, pushing further into the unknown than any humans had gone before. On a routine survey of an uncharted sector, the Pioneer detected something unusual: energy signatures that did not match any natural phenomenon, structures that appeared on their sensors as geometric shapes too perfect to be random. "Take us in closer," Captain Grant ordered. What they found changed the course of human history. Rising from the surface of a dead moon were the ruins of a city built by beings who had vanished millions of years ago. Towers of black metal reached toward the stars. Walkways stretched between buildings that had been designed for creatures far larger than humans. And beneath the surface, buried in chambers that had been sealed for eons, lay technology beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. Doctor was the ship's archaeologist, a quiet man who had spent his life studying dead civilizations. He led the first team into the ruins with trembling hands and wide eyes. What he found inside made him fall to his knees in wonder. "They called themselves the Architects," reported to the Council of Governors weeks later. His voice was hoarse from days of non-stop work and too little sleep. "They ruled this region of space millions of years before any current species evolved. They built wonders that we can barely comprehend. And then they disappeared." He activated a holographic display that showed images from the ruins, machines that could reshape matter at the molecular level, weapons that harnessed the power of stars, computers that contained more information than every database in the Galactic Council combined. "They left all of this behind," continued, "almost as if they wanted someone to find it, someone who would come after them and continue their work." The discovery sparked a golden age of advancement. Human scientists worked around the clock to reverse engineer the architect technology. They combined it with their own innovations, creating hybrid systems that were more powerful than either source alone. Dr. Cole, the son of Cole, led a team that developed energy weapons capable of piercing any shield. Engineer Shaw designed armor plating that could repair itself after taking damage. Captain created navigation systems that allowed ships to fold space itself, traveling vast distances in the blink of an eye. Governor addressed the human population on the 50th anniversary of the banishment. She was the granddaughter of, who had died 10 years earlier after seeing her people rise from refugees to rulers of their own domain, had inherited her grandmother's passion for her people and her gift for inspiring speeches. Our ancestors were cast out because the galaxy feared them, declared. Her voice carried across every world in human space through the communication networks. They were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons they believed. They thought we would destroy their civilization through war and conquest. Instead, we have built something greater than they could ever imagine. We have tamed the abyss. We have unlocked secrets that were old when their species were still learning to walk. We have become the masters of our own destiny. The crowd that had gathered on Haven cheered until the ground shook. Similar celebrations erupted across all 12 colony worlds. Humanity had truly become something new, something that the Galactic Council had never anticipated when they pronounced their verdict half a century ago. But while the humans of the Abyss celebrated their achievements, events in civilized space were taking a dark turn. The Dominion had always been the most aggressive species in the Galactic Council. They were reptilian beings with cold eyes and colder hearts, evolved from predators who had ruled there through violence and fear. For centuries they had chafed under the restrictions imposed by the Council, forced to share power with species they considered inferior. In the 48th year after humanity's banishment, they launched their campaign of conquest. Their fleets swept across civilized space, crushing the defenses of world after world. They fell in a single day. The colonies were reduced to smoking ruins. Species that had voted to banish humanity now screamed for help as warships appeared in their skies. The Galactic Council was powerless to stop the onslaught. Their military had grown weak during the long peace, while they had been secretly building their forces for generations. High Arbiter watched as everything he had worked to protect crumbled around him. In his desperation, the ancient leader made a decision that would have been unthinkable 50 years earlier. He summoned his most trusted advisors and spoke words that burned his tongue like acid. "We must contact the humans." His advisors recoiled in horror. The humans were exiles, condemned to die in the abyss. To ask for their help would be an admission that the Council had been wrong. It would be humiliation beyond measure. But was old enough to know that survival mattered more than pride. "Send an envoy to the abyss," he commanded. "Find out if any humans still live, and if they do, offer them whatever they want in exchange for their help." The diplomatic vessel launched within a week, carrying Ambassador into the darkness beyond the galactic rim. She did not know what she would find there. She did not know if she would survive the journey. But she knew that her people were dying, and humanity was their only hope. The Council's diplomatic vessel emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the abyss, and within seconds it was surrounded by human patrol ships. Ambassador stared at her sensors in disbelief. The vessels that encircled her were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons that her computer could not identify. Their hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them look like holes cut into the fabric of space itself. "This is the Abyss Defense Fleet," a human voice crackled over her communication system. "You have entered restricted territory. Identify yourself and state your purpose, or you will be destroyed." Tentacles trembled as she activated her transmitter. "I am Ambassador of the Galactic Council. I come in peace to speak with your leaders." There was a long pause. When the voice returned, it carried a note of dark amusement. "The Galactic Council, how interesting. Hold your position. Do not attempt to move or communicate with anyone else. We will escort you to our space." The journey to Haven took 3 days. during that time, was not allowed to leave her ship or contact the Council. Human vessels surrounded her at all times, their weapons trained on her hull. She had come to find refugees struggling to survive in the wilderness. Instead, she had found an empire. When she finally landed on Haven, was escorted through cities that took her breath away. Towers of gleaming metal rose toward the sky. Vehicles moved through the air in orderly patterns. Citizens walked the streets with confidence in their steps and pride in their eyes. This was not a civilization clinging to survival. This was a civilization that had conquered its environment and bent it to its will. Admiral met the ambassador in the Hall of Remembrance. It was a vast chamber built to honor those who had died during the Exodus and the hard years that followed. The walls were covered with names, thousands upon thousands of them, each one representing a human life lost because of the Council's verdict. Stood before a section of wall dedicated to the victims of the first radiation storm. His father's name was not there because Jack had lived to see humanity rise from the ashes, but many of his friends were listed, people who had believed in the Exodus and had died before seeing its success. "You have come to ask for our help," said without turning around. It was not a question. Moved forward on her 6 legs, her compound eyes taking in the monument and the man who stood before it. The threat in all civilized space. Dozens of worlds have fallen. Millions of people have died. The Council believes that with human assistance, we might be able to stop them. Finally turned to face her. His eyes were hard as stone. The Council believed many things 50 years ago. They believed we were a disease. They believed we would die in the abyss. They believed they were rid of us forever. Governor stepped forward from her position among the assembled human leaders. She was dressed in the simple clothes of the abyss, practical garments designed for a harsh environment. Around her stood generals, admirals, scientists, and governors, the people who had built human civilization from nothing. "My grandmother stood where you stand now," said. "She heard your people sentence us to extinction. She watched as 17 species voted to cast us into the darkness. Tell me, Ambassador, how many of those species are still alive?" His voice was quiet when she answered, 11. They have destroyed 6 of them completely. "And yet you come to us for salvation," shook her head slowly. "The Council spent 50 years forgetting about us. You probably hoped we were dead. Now that death comes for you, suddenly you remember that humans exist." General Stone laughed without any warmth. She was a warrior who had spent her life defending the Abyss colonies from threats both internal and external. Her body bore scars from a dozen battles, and her reputation made enemies tremble. "You recognize that you need us," Stone said. "That is not the same as recognizing that you were wrong." The debate continued for hours, presented her case with growing desperation, describing the horrors that they had inflicted on civilized space. Cities burned to ash, populations enslaved or exterminated, cultural artifacts destroyed simply to prove that the conquerors could destroy them. She begged for mercy, for compassion, for anything that might save her people from annihilation. Many humans wanted nothing to do with the Council. They remembered the verdict that had condemned their ancestors. They remembered the deaths, the suffering, and the years of struggle in the abyss. Why should they risk their lives for species that had tried to kill them? Others argued for intervention. Old hatred served no purpose if the galaxy burned. They would not stop at civilized space. Eventually, they would come to the abyss, and humanity would have to fight them anyway. Better to strike now while the Council's fleets could still provide some support. In the end, it was Dr. Cole who made the decisive argument. He was the foremost scientist in human space, a man who had unlocked secrets of the architect technology that others had thought impossible. But he was also a father and a grandfather, and he thought about the future as much as the past. "We have built something remarkable here," he told the Council of Governors. "But our children should have the choice to walk under different stars. They should be able to visit Earth, though their ancestors were forced to leave behind. We can demand that choice as our price." The negotiations lasted for weeks. Human diplomats presented their terms to Ambassador, who transmitted them to the Council with shaking hands. The demands were harsh, perhaps harsher than any terms ever imposed on the Galactic Council. Full recognition of human sovereignty over the abyss and any territories they might claim in the future. A permanent seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. War reparations paid over the next 100 years to compensate for the suffering caused by the banishment. And a formal apology broadcast to every world in civilized space, an admission that the Council had been wrong to exile humanity. High Arbiter received the terms in his command bunker as fleets closed in on the Council's last strongholds. He read each demand carefully, his crystalline form flickering with emotions that his species rarely displayed. For a long time he said nothing. His advisors urged him to refuse. The terms were an insult. They would make the Council look weak. They would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Silence them with a gesture. We condemned them to death and they built an empire. We tried to destroy them and they became stronger than us. If we do not accept these terms, we will die. And then the humans will take everything anyway, because there will be no one left to stop them. He signed the agreement and sent it back to the abyss. On Haven, Admiral read the Council's acceptance to a crowd of millions. When he finished, he looked up at the sky that had sheltered his people for 50 years. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We are going home." Human fleet emerged from the abyss like a storm breaking across the sky. 200 warships crossed into civilized space for the first time in 50 years, their hulls gleaming with technology that made the watching alien vessels seem like relics of a forgotten age. At the head of the formation flew the dreadnought Defiance, with Admiral standing on its bridge and watching the stars of his ancestors fill the. Word of the human fleet spread across civilized space faster than light itself. Species that had voted for humanity's banishment watched in terror and wonder as the exile vessels passed through their systems. Some tried to flee, fearing that the humans had come for revenge. Others sent messages of welcome, hoping to curry favor with these new powers. Ignored them all. He had not come for them. He had come for the. The battle of would be remembered for 1,000 generations. The Armada had gathered above the Council, preparing for a final assault that would end the war and establish their dominion over the galaxy. 3,000 warships hung in formation, their weapons charged and ready to deliver death to the last defenders of civilized space. They detected the approaching human fleet and felt no concern. They had crushed every force that opposed them. What could 200 ships do against 3,000? Commander Greg Palmer led the first attack wave. His fighter squadron, the Black Wolves, had trained in the radiation storms and gravitational chaos of the abyss. Flying through enemy formations was almost relaxing by comparison. They wove between vessels like dancers at a ball, their weapons slicing through shields that should have been impenetrable. Captain Sandra commanded the destroyer Swift Justice. She had earned her name by hunting pirates in the outer reaches of human space, delivering final judgment to those who preyed on the innocent. Now she turned her skills against a larger enemy, her ship tearing through cruisers like a blade through cloth. Where she passed, explosions bloomed like flowers of fire. Lieutenant sat at the heart of the fleet's command network, coordinating targeting systems across every human vessel. The architect technology that human scientists had adapted allowed their weapons to find gaps in defenses that should not have existed. Ships that had survived 100 battles died in seconds, their crews never understanding what had killed them. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral watched the battle unfold. Commander Bate Foster stood beside him, analyzing data streams that flowed across her displays. "They do not understand what they are fighting," she observed. "They have never faced anything like us." Nodded slowly. "No one has, and no one ever will again." The commanders realized too late that they were not fighting ordinary opponents. The human ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their tactics more unpredictable. Every strategy they had used to conquer civilized space failed against these enemies who had been forged in the abyss. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the armada had been reduced to debris drifting in the void. Not a single human ship had been destroyed, though several had taken damage that their self-repairing hulls were already fixing. The war continued for another 6 months, but the outcome was never in doubt. Human forces swept across civilized space, liberating world after world from occupation. The conquered species watched in amazement as humans fought and died to free them, these same humans they had once condemned to extinction. General Stone led the ground assault on the. Her soldiers, hardened by decades of survival in the abyss, moved through enemy cities like ghosts. They were efficient and professional, avoiding unnecessary destruction whenever possible. This was not a war of extermination. It was a war of justice. The leaders surrendered in a ceremony broadcast to every world in the galaxy. They knelt before admiral and governor, their scales dull with defeat, and their eyes empty of the arrogance that had once burned there. "Take them to the council chamber," ordered. "Let them face judgment in the same place where my people were condemned." The trial was brief. The evidence of atrocities was overwhelming. Millions dead, civilizations destroyed, crimes that description committed in the name of conquest. The Galactic Council debated what punishment could possibly match such evil. It was Governor who delivered the verdict. She stood in the same spot where her grandmother had stood 50 years earlier, hearing the words that would change human history forever. Now it was her turn to speak. "They will not be banished," she declared. "They will not be cast into the void to die, because we are not like you." She turned to address the council members, many of whom could not meet her gaze. High Arbiter sat on his throne of living crystal, diminished by age and defeat. His form barely pulsed with light. 50 years ago, you looked at humanity and saw a threat to be eliminated. You were afraid of what we might become, and in your fear, you created the very thing you dreaded. You forged us in the fires of the abyss, and we emerged stronger than you could have imagined. The chamber was silent as she continued speaking. They will face justice for their crimes, but they will not face extinction. Their leaders will be punished. Their military will be dismantled. But their people will be given the chance to rebuild and become something better. That is the human way. We do not destroy our enemies. We give them the opportunity to become our friends. Spoke from his throne, his voice barely a whisper. "What would you have us do now?" Smiled, the same smile her grandmother had worn when the Exodus fleet departed into the unknown. "Now you learn to live with us, as equals, as partners. The galaxy is vast and there are challenges ahead that will require all of us working together. The architects left warnings in their ruins, hints of something coming from beyond the void, something that makes the look like children throwing tantrums. We spent 50 years preparing for the worst the universe could throw at us. We are ready for whatever comes next. The question is whether you are." In the years that followed, the galaxy transformed. Human colonies spread across civilized space, bringing with them the innovations born in the abyss. Human diplomats sat on the council. Human scientists shared their knowledge with species that had once voted for their extinction. Human soldiers trained armies to defend against the darkness that the architects had warned about. Admiral retired to Haven. The first world humanity had settled in exile. He built a house on a hill overlooking the city where his people had begun their new life. From his porch, he could see the spaceport where ships departed every day for destinations across the galaxy. His son brought to visit him on warm summer evenings. They sat at his feet and listened to stories of the Exodus, of the hard years in the abyss, and of the war that had brought humanity back to the stars. The children had been born in a galaxy where humans were respected and feared. They could not imagine a time when things had been different. On Earth, abandoned for half a century, the first human settlers returned. They walked through cities that nature had reclaimed, through streets where trees now grew and buildings crumbled. But they did not see ruin. They saw possibility. The reconstruction began immediately. New cities rose beside the old. Children played in parks that their great-grandparents had once visited. Families spread blankets on grass and watched the same stars that their ancestors had watched, long before the banishment and all that followed. Above them, the Abyss fleet still patrolled the darkness beyond the galactic rim. They were humanity's guardians, watching for threats that might emerge from the void. Some said they were preparing for the return of whatever had destroyed the architects. Others said they simply enjoyed the darkness that had become their home. But everyone agreed on one thing. The Galactic Council had banished humanity to die in the abyss. Instead, humanity had conquered it. And now the universe belonged to them.